All right. Just like Hugo said, Elliot's got a great presentation for us. I don't want to take away too much of his thunder, but Elliot Jordan is with Netflix, and him and his team developed this Escrow Buddy tool that we're going to learn a bit more about today. So, with that, Elliot, the floor is yours.
Cool. Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you for having. I'm
Thank you for joining us.
yeah, I'm kind of on a book tour of sorts, trying to spread the word and share the awareness of Escrow Buddy with everybody. So I appreciate coming and talking to the group. Um, so all the links that I mentioned today and the slides themselves are going to be at the link that you see on your screen, which I'm also going to share here in chat, just so it's easier to click on. Um, this is basically the same content that I presented at JNUC this year or this last year. So that's what the link looks like, but I freshened it up a little bit so that we have all the latest data for today. But don't feel like you have to write anything down if you see links on the screen. It's all linked from that Markdown document that's on the screen now. Cool. So who am I? I am Elliot Jordan. For years, I've helped create and maintain Mac tools that hopefully some of you have used, like Recipe Robot, Auto Packager, and DocLib. I was an IT consultant for about a decade before becoming a client platform engineer for companies with large Mac fleets. I'm now a senior client systems engineer at Netflix. Um, so I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to jump right in and show you what you came here to see. Uh, I'll kind of set up the situation here, and then I'll show you a 1-minute demo of Escrow Buddy in action. So let me set the scene. On the bottom, you've got a Mac that was encrypted with Filevault prior to enrollment in Jamf or any other MDM. I know that the focus here is on Jamf, but Escrow Buddy does work with other MDMs as well. But the point is, we don't have a recovery key escrowed for this Mac. We've already deployed Escrow Buddy to this Mac, so it should be ready to generate a new key upon the next login. On the right, the top right, I've set up a looping API query to Jamf that shows what Jamf knows about the recovery key status. And this confirms that we don't have a recovery key escrowed for this Mac yet. And on the top left, we are streaming the local Escrow Buddy logs over SSH, which we'll see shortly as soon as we take action here. So we'll kick things off by having the user log out. And as soon as our FileVault authorized user logs back in again, a new FileVault key is generated, as you can see in the logs at the left there. And upon the next recon, the key is escrowed back to Jamf. Now, the recon doesn't need to happen at login necessarily. If you have a daily recon, that's probably fine. But I've set it up to happen at login here just to speed up the demo. We'll give it a few seconds to finish. What's happening behind the scenes is the Mac is sending the encrypted key to Jamf when it responds to the security info MDM command, which occurs during and after Jamf recon. And there you go. There's the personal recovery key. As you can see, we've now got a valid recovery key according to the Jamf API. That's it. That's what Escrow Buddy does. It generates that new key upon login, which gives the Mac a chance to escrow to the MDM of record. And that's really useful when you have Macs that for some reason don't have those keys escrowed already. So let me start all the way back at the beginning now that you've seen the good stuff and give you some context for why this is needed in the first place. Why do file vault recovery keys go missing in the first place? As I mentioned, this could be because we migrated from another MDM. That MDM has all the keys, but it's not always easy to ship those from one MDM to your next MDM. So you're basically starting from zero in that situation. Or the Macs could have been encrypted by conscientious users before they were enrolled in MDM. If you don't have ADE, automated device enrollment, as part of your setup, or there's some Macs that snuck around or fell through the cracks of ADE, maybe they were encrypted before they were enrolled, and then Jamf wouldn't have the key for those. Maybe your escrow profile was misconfigured. You do need a configuration profile that tells the Mac to escrow to a specific server. Jamf includes that in the Filevault payload, but not everybody was using the Filevault MDM payload. Some people were just using the Jamf policy. So, some computers may have slipped through the cracks that way. Or it could always happen that the database or some other place where the key was stored was corrupted, or some data was lost, or you had to revert back to an old snapshot or something like that. So for any number of reasons, these keys might be missing. And this shows up in Jamf as the status invalid or unknown in the individual recovery key attribute. So how do we fix it? Well, we could just toggle Filevault off and on. That will generate and escrow a new key. Of course, there's some risk there because the Mac will be unencrypted for a time, and that's not ideal, especially if it's a laptop. The other option is manually using FD setup. You can have any Filevault authorized administrator run sudo FD setup change recovery key dash personal in a terminal window, and that will rotate the Filevault recovery key manually. Of course, not everybody's comfortable or familiar with terminal commands, so that doesn't scale to the VPs and the lawyers and the accountants and everybody in the company who might not be familiar with that. So the third option is really the only scalable way to do it, which is to automate the input to FD setup. FD setup can take a plist with credentials for input. So that's definitely the way to go. But how do we do that? We're either going to need the valid personal recovery key for the Mac already, or a Filevault authorized user's password. In the scenarios I outlined in the previous slide, we know we don't have a valid Filevault recovery key. So we have to resort to the user's password. That's what we'll need to do. The old way to make this happen, which we should not do, just to be clear, was to make the user aware, usually some kind of on-screen messaging that says, hey, your Mac needs a Filevault key regenerated or something like that. And then when they click next, we prompt them for their actual login password. We take that and in memory, not on disk, we pipe that to the FD setup input, which allows us to automate the regeneration of a new key. And in the presence of a profile that tells the Mac to escrow, that key should be escrowed back to the MDM of record. And then we communicate the result to the end user, ideally something like, the Filevault recovery key has been successfully reissued, or there's been an error, please contact the help desk, something like that. So that's the old way. Unfortunately, this requires a ton of work to do well, and I put well in quotes here because even if you do all this work, it's not guaranteed to turn out ideally. Setting context might require sending an email campaign in advance of the remediation, showing on-screen messages with information, or even providing like a self-service item for users to opt in to this workflow. You don't want to just spring that password prompt on people unexpectedly. You want to warm them up and make sure they know what they're doing. But just the fact that you have to eventually warm them up to a password prompt is not great. It conditions users to be more accepting of credential prompts in general, which is a huge vector that malware uses to get a foothold on systems. So you're not building a healthy security culture by prompting people for their passwords unnecessarily. So that's the old way. Don't do that. I admit I have a confession. I'm partially responsible for popularizing the old way. I presented that method in 2015. I posted my script and workflow to GitHub. It's still there. It still works as far as I know. I've been maintaining it year after year. But I was just unaware until last year that there was a better way. So now that I know there's a better way, I'm kind of shouting from the rooftops to get everybody to switch. That's the context here. What is the new way that I'm trying to get people to switch to? That is an authorization plugin, specifically macOS login window authorization plugin. These plugins are used by the macOS login window, where people enter their username and password to log in, to make decisions and provide automation around the login process. A huge benefit of authorization plugins is that they can securely access the credentials being used to log in and piggyback on that process to use those credentials elsewhere securely. A common example of this is federation to an IDP, an identity provider, such as what Jamf Connect does. Jamf Connect does use an authorization plugin to do that. So an authorization plugin is ideal for automating FD setup because it can leverage the trusted macOS login interface to do it, obviating the need for any additional password prompts at all. The user just logs in as they're used to doing normally, and that's it. You just use that credential that they've already provided. So there's no time-consuming communication, context setting with users, or support tickets from people who are suspicious, or maintenance of fragile shell scripts. None of that is needed. You just piggyback on the login window and you're done. So I made a kind of a flowchart or a systems diagram of how this all connects together. Um, I'll just kind of go through it briefly here. It all really centers around that bottom in blue there, the trusted macOS login window framework. It's what people experience every time they start up their Mac. It's what they're used to, and we shouldn't change that. The authorization policy database, the security server, and the FD setup binary are all also tools that are built into macOS, trusted. They've been there for years. Fingers crossed, they will continue being there for years. So we can count on all that stuff in blue existing in macOS. Above here in green, we have the items that Escrow Buddy itself includes, which comprise the authorization plugin and a script that adds the plugin mechanism to the macOS authorization database using the security command. So when you deploy Escrow Buddy, the installer takes care of that. That's how the thing gets installed. The stuff in orange, you'll also be included in your deployment. These are things that you'll be responsible for deploying in addition to the Escrow Buddy installer. That includes a configuration profile that actually enables Escrow. This, like I said, is included with Jamf's Filevault MDM payload. Other MDMs do it differently. You can maybe upload a custom profile for your MDM if you want, but it basically includes a certificate and a server host name that says any new Filevault key generated on this Mac goes here, and that's it. And the other component is a configuration profile is a plist created with a default command, not a profile, that sets generate new key to true in the Escrow Buddy preferences. What that does is that it tells Escrow Buddy that at next login, go ahead and do the key regeneration. We need a new key on this Mac. If you don't do that, Escrow Buddy will just sit dormant and not actually do any work, which allows you to deploy Escrow Buddy broadly and then just configure it for action on the computers that you actually need keys from, if you choose. Or you can just set generate new key to true on installation. It's up to you. Sometimes that's simpler too. But the beauty of this arrangement is that Escrow Buddy doesn't actually handle creating or communicating the key itself. We don't have to like securely encrypt the key or the user's credentials or anything like that. All that happens in the built-in macOS tools and using the already existing MDM pathways that Apple has provided. So Escrow Buddy, this third-party tool that I'm asking you to trust, doesn't actually need to access the credential or store it in any way. So it's all just piggybacking on Apple's tools. So if this is such a great idea, then how come somebody hasn't thought of it before 2023? Well, as it turns out, Crypt did think of it. Back in 2017, Crypt, for those not familiar, is an authorization plugin that's most often paired with a Crypt server in order to escrow Filevault, personal recovery keys, and other secrets if you choose. The Crypt agent can be deployed standalone with no server and generate new keys upon login, which is basically what Escrow Buddy does. However, Crypt is primarily targeted at administrators who are running a Crypt server. The included payload, documentation, and code base is all written by and for those who don't escrow their Filevault keys to MDM intentionally. They escrow to Crypt. So we realize there's a potential documentation or even just a marketing gap to be filled in that ecosystem where people who could use this tool just weren't aware of it and weren't that interested in it because it's targeted at a different issue. So we set out to create an authorization plugin that generates new Filevault keys specifically for escrow to MDM and no more. So that's what Escrow Buddy does. That's what we built at Netflix. Just a stripped down alternative to Crypt, laser focused on generating new personal recovery keys for escrow to MDM specifically. So Escrow Buddy generates the new key upon login once it's configured, and at no other time. It doesn't try to do it after login or at the next startup or anything like that. It does it at the next login after you configure it properly, and then sets it back to inactive. And every login after that just ignores. And Escrow Buddy also checks for the presence of a proper MDM profile that configures escrow, because obviously without that, there would be nowhere for the escrowed key, for the newly generated key to go to. So we do need that. And that's one of the requirements that we laid out in the README. So it's been a huge success for us. We started the project with about half of our Mac fleet with invalid or missing personal recovery keys, mostly because they were encrypted prior to enrollment. It had been long part of the guidance that we had been offering new hires. But enrollment in Jamf meant that we had MDM capabilities on this Mac, but we didn't have the personal recovery key. So we needed to fix that. So we developed Escrow Buddy around February, March, and we started testing Escrow Buddy in March, April, and we deployed broadly to Netflix Macs in May. In the few months since we deployed to the end of this graph, when I stopped collecting the data because I was satisfied that we were done, we went from 50% to almost 95% key validity since deployment. And I'm happy to report that even since then, we've gotten to like 98, 99% key validity. And I think that those remaining few computers that aren't valid are either newly enrolled and they just haven't had a chance to log out or restart and log in again, or there's just one-off issues with Filevault on those computers that we need to address. So if you want to achieve similar results at your organization, maybe you're starting from 90% already, and great, you just need an extra boost to get to 100. Or maybe you have literally 0 keys because you're starting from a new MDM and you need to gather all your max keys again. So how do you get started? Well, for Jamf, we've actually got a wiki for Escrow Buddy in general with all of our documentation. And there's a page on the wiki specifically for Jamf deployment and tips and tricks. The folks at HCS have also created a PDF guide on configuring Escrow Buddy with Jamf. So there's 2 really good resources there. But the basics are going to be downloading the package, the latest Escrow Buddy release from GitHub, and uploading that to your Jamf. Creating a smart group that collects Macs that have missing or invalid Filevault recovery key status, and then creating a policy that installs Escrow Buddy and configures Escrow Buddy with the default command from the README. That command lets Escrow Buddy know that at the next login, a new key needs to be generated. And without that command, Escrow Buddy will just be inactive. That's it. Those are the 3 ingredients. And at the next login, and then the subsequent recon after that, you should have a new Filevault recovery key escrowed to Jamf for that Mac. There are some advanced workflow options if you want to get creative. Some things that we've experimented with are something that we personally do are separate installation and configuration policies. I prefer that because I'd rather just ensure that Escrow Buddy is installed broadly and then configure it to be active only on the computers that need it. At some point, we might actually go a step farther and remove Escrow Buddy from the computers that we've already got a key from, or that have generated a new key thanks to Escrow Buddy, and we don't need Escrow Buddy to take any action. If those computers fall into disrepair again and need a new key, then we can always reinstall later. So that's one potential option. And similarly, that's a good segue to recidivism detection, which means Macs that go from valid key to invalid or missing more than once. You can flag that so that you can investigate the root cause of that. There was a Jamf product issue a while ago that would just randomly flip from valid to unknown status for Filevault recovery keys. So if you were using a smart group for that deployment, it would mess up all your membership, and you would be deploying to computers that don't actually need it. And it would be the next recon that would reset that. I think that was due to be fixed. I haven't followed up on whether that's fixed yet, but anyway, we created a method that's documented on the wiki here that will show you when those Macs are looping like that. Also, automatic key rotation. This is a feature of Crypt. This is one of those advanced features that if you really do need this, you might actually look at Crypt and Crypt Server to see if that is something that you're interested in, because that is one of those excellent power user features that Crypt offers. But if you just want to do it using the Jamf built-in tools, you can set an extension attribute that reads a date stamp that the default command script that you're running to configure Escrow writes. So it writes that date stamp when Escrow is configured, then it reads it back in an EA, so you can see when that max key was rotated. If it was like within, after a certain date or within a set number of dates, you can then run a policy on that Mac that rotates that key again and sets that default command again. So if that's something you're interested in. Also, logout notification. So obviously all this happens at the next login. How do you get the user to log out if they just never shut their computer down or never restart? So I've done a blog article about one potential way to do this, which is linked from the Jamf wiki as well. But basically, you can use the macOS Notification Center. You can use an on-screen alert from something like Swift Dialog or the DataJar notifier app or whatever you happen to use. So there's a lot of options there. I would encourage you, though, to consider whether you really need user notification. Chances are, if you're already enforcing logout or restart for any other reason, software updates, for example, then you probably don't need this. You can just have Escrow piggyback on that process rather than notifying people to log out as soon as you detect that they need a new key. We did not use any user notification at all, and we got from 50% to 95% like that. So I would challenge you to try that first, and then only if you need notification, then you can use some of those other more creative methods. So all these are linked from the wiki on screen, which is linked from that link that I sent you at the beginning. And I'll show that again at the end, so you can write that down if you haven't seen it. There are probably other creative workflow options that people will dream up in the future, so keep an eye out on the wiki. I encourage you, if you have other ideas, you can add those to the wiki, or if you feel like it's needed, you can surface that in the Filevault Mac admins Slack channel or in our Escrow issues or something like that. We can discuss it. So tips and troubleshooting after you've configured Escrow I'll just kind of breeze through these because again, they're all captured in more detail on the wiki. But basically, reading logs is done with the log show or log stream commands. And in order to see that in real time with the log stream, you really have to SSH into the computer that's having issues, which is probably not realistic for computers that are working remotely or you're not in the same office. So it might be that you have to use log show to look back 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour to read those logs. But again, that's all documented. You can check that out on the wiki. Making sure to test not just Escrow but any authorization plugin with new macOS versions. I'm hoping authorization plugins are here to stay, and they're going to be in many future macOS versions so that Escrow can continue being useful. But that's not a guarantee. You want to test Escrow Jamf Connect, Crypt, whatever other authorization plugins you use with each new macOS version before that version is available to your fleet, just to make sure that there's not going to be anything that would block login from occurring under normal circumstances. So you can use Appleseed for IT to access those betas. And I think the address for that is beta.apple.com/IT. All of you are probably familiar with that, but if not, then reach out to your friendly neighborhood consultant or Mac admin. And then something that I did to gather this chart that you saw a couple slides ago was I captured two advanced searches in Jamf. One of them was for invalid keys, and one was for valid keys, and both were limited by check-in inventory within 30 days. And that, if you use an API script that runs daily to gather the membership count of both of those advanced searches, then you can create a chart that you can show your managers to say, hey, look at this line go up and get some credit for what you did. So that's a good pro tip. And then finally, managing the authorization database over time is not trivial. Some Mac OS updates, just because they need to add new things to the login window mechanisms, will reset the authorization database to a known good state. Again, Jamf Connect is also subject to this kind of chaos that happens at macOS updates. But I wrote a blog post on how to fix that and how to check for it using an extension attribute. So you can use an extension attribute to detect whether the authorization database is still configured, and if it's not, reinstall Escrow Buddy, and that should take care of it. Um, if you've already deployed Escrow Buddy, I know some of you have probably already heard of it, maybe even deployed it successfully, I hope. I would encourage you to fill out our usage survey. It's just a couple quick questions that we're gathering impact information so that we can properly prioritize future maintenance and feature requests and other things for the community. It's basically asking like how many Macs did you deploy it to? Out of how many did you manage? Was it successful? Any comments? That's basically it. So once you've already deployed Escrow Buddy, I encourage you to fill that out. And then a quick note on where Escrow Buddy is hosted. Netflix is proud to have partnered with the Mac Admins open source organization to host the source code for Escrow Buddy on GitHub. So this puts Escrow Buddy alongside other important tools like Nudge, UMAD, and the Mac Admins Python package. We've configured automation that allows Escrow Buddy to be signed and notarized by the Mac Admin open source signing certificate when new releases are available. And hosting in the Mac Admin open source community ensures community contribution and maintenance will be as easy as possible for as long as possible. So linked and pictured above is a session from the PSU Mac Admins conference in July, where I joined some esteemed colleagues at a panel and talked about open source contributions, and specifically the Mac Admin open source organization on GitHub. So definitely check out that session if you're interested. And I believe the organization is also looking for other impactful projects for Mac admins to host in that repository. So if you think you have a candidate for that, watch that video, and Nate will describe how to get in touch. And so the takeaways for today, I would encourage you all to check your Filevault key recovery in Jamf, key validity, sorry, your Filevault recovery key validity in Jamf, and make sure that all your Macs have valid keys. If they don't, then consider using Escrow Buddy to remediate. Definitely don't prompt users for their passwords if you can avoid it. Leverage that login window automation. Authorization plugins are the modern way to do this, and we're trying to make that as easy as possible with Escrow Buddy. So yeah, that's it. That's the takeaway. Thank you, everybody. Links on the screen again for all the notes, and I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
Thanks so much, Elliot. That was awesome. I know it's hard to end the presentation. You don't have the raucous round of applause that you might get at a JNUC. So great job. We appreciate that. And yeah, we got about 13 minutes left. So please, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask those however you're comfortable. Drop them in the chat. Go ahead and unmute yourself. It seemed like a pretty comprehensive presentation. I think you have been doing a book tour, haven't you? Yeah, that seemed pretty ironed out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for people to switch or implement for the first time if they've never done it. But yeah, I think this is a problem that's affecting a lot of organizations. And as soon as we started looking at this at Netflix, it was so obvious to me, like, everybody can benefit from this. Why don't we just do this once and then share it with the world? And that's what we're trying to do.
Oh, that's awesome. Chris just mentioned in the chat that we will be posting this presentation to our YouTube channel. So if you guys want to go back and revisit it or be able to see those QR codes or those links that Elliot's had shared, we'll be posting that to the Rocket Man Tech YouTube channel. You can get there either by going to the YouTube channel or just going to our website, rocketman.tech. A couple different ways to find it. If you just put Rocket Man into YouTube, you got to do a lot of sifting. So you definitely have to Rocket Man Tech on YouTube. Otherwise, you're in for a lot of great Elton John playlists. Do you have any questions floating around there, Raphael?
I see
Yes,
some
sir.
questions in chat. I can try to address some of
Yeah.
those.
I've got a question. In regards to authorization plugin, can that be used for anywhere where we need to provide a user's credentials?
Yes. I mean, it's not trivial to implement. It does require some Swift or Objective-C, but yeah, anytime you need to leverage the user credentials for some other thing other than macOS login, it is a potential use case for an authorization plugin. The example that Apple gives in its documentation is kind of cute. It's like when you log in, you're also prompted for a PIN code that you can use to send faxes or something like that. So yeah, anything that is decision making or automation around the login process is a potential login authorization mechanism territory.
Okay. Thank you.
Jacob said you implemented Escrow Buddy and quickly took our invalid PRKs from around 80 to around 20. Excellent. Hopefully you can get to zero and definitely submit the usage survey once you're there. Dennis asked, how would this work with Jamf Connect since Jamf Connect already modifies the authorization database? The answer is they should coexist unless and until Jamf Connect starts doing the same thing and regenerating keys at login, which for the record, I did suggest to Jamf before we even started building this, like, why doesn't Jamf Connect do this? It's so obvious. So someday, if Jamf Connect builds that feature in, then yeah, you don't need both. Until then, they should be able to coexist, no problem. Danny asked, we use mobile AD accounts. We're having issues when restarting or powering the computer that until the local admin logs in, we can't see or access mobile local accounts. Um, I think I mean, if that's relating to Escrow Buddy, I think it would depend on whether those accounts are FileVault authorized. If if the person who's logging in is not a FileVault user, then there's no way they can regenerate a new key. So you might want to look at, what AD group is authorized for FileVault on that setup. Yeah, I've stopped using mobile AD accounts a while ago, so unfortunately I can't tell you firsthand whether that's uh, expected.
Chris is sharing a testimonial that he was so inspired by your presentation at the Penn State Mac Admins Conference that we leveraged this with our clients. And it seems like no one had an issue, worked great, bada bing, bada boom.
Nice. That's
And
great.
it's amazing when that happens when you're trying something new for the first time. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
it just worked. That's crazy.
I love when things work the way they're supposed to.